He thought no woman would want a man with kids, she said. You're wrong about that. It turned suddenly, without warning, and left him standing alone with two small hands holding onto his own. Becoming a father was something he loved deeply, but becoming a single father was something he never expected. One day, the house was loud with shared responsibility. The next, it was quiet in a way that felt heavy. There was no one to pass the day's worries to, no one to help decide what to do next. Every choice became his alone, and every mistake felt twice as big. At first, he told himself he could manage. He had no other option. Each morning started before the sun rose. He woke up tired but pushed himself out of bed because the kids needed breakfast, clean clothes, and someone to remind them to brush their teeth. Some days, he barely had time to think. He packed lunches, tied shoelaces, and rushed everyone out the door. He learned how to move fast while feeling slow inside. Work was not easier. He carried his responsibilities with him, always checking the time, always worried about getting back before daycare closed or school ended. When coworkers talked about weekend plans or date nights, he smiled politely but stayed quiet. His weekends were filled with laundry, grocery shopping, and cleaning up toys scattered across the floor. Nights ended with bedtime stories and whispered promises that everything would be okay, even when he wasn't sure it was true. As months turned into years, the tiredness settled deep into his bones. It was not just physical exhaustion. It was the weight of always being needed, always being strong. He had no space to fall apart. If he broke down, who would hold everything together? So he learned to swallow his feelings and move on. Sometimes, late at night, when the kids were asleep and the house finally rested, he sat alone in silence. That was when thoughts came back to him. Thoughts about the life he once imagined. Thoughts about loneliness. Thoughts about whether anyone would ever see him as more than a man with responsibilities written all over his face. He did try once or twice to open himself to the idea of love again. Friends encouraged him. They said he deserved happiness too. So he tried small steps, conversations, polite messages, brief meetings. But each time he mentioned his children, he felt the air change. The smiles became careful. The interest faded. Some people were kind about it, others were honest in a way that still hurt. They said they were not ready for that kind of life. They wanted freedom. They wanted something simple. He understood. Truly, he did. Raising children was not easy, and choosing a partner with kids meant choosing responsibility. Still, understanding did not stop the feeling of rejection. Each experience quietly confirmed the fear growing inside him. Slowly, without noticing, he began to believe that his life was already too full for love. He started telling himself stories to protect his heart. He said love was for people with fewer complications. He said romance was something he had already missed. He said it was better to focus only on being a good father. These thoughts helped him survive, but they also built walls around him. He stopped looking people in the eye the same way. He stopped imagining conversations that went beyond daily needs. He dressed simply, spoke carefully, and kept his life small. Not because he wanted less, but because hoping for more hurt too much. Still, his children were his light. They laughed easily, trusted him completely, and believed he could fix anything. Their small victories, good grades, scraped knees healed, bedtime hugs gave him purpose. When they smiled at him, he felt strong again. When they fell asleep on his shoulder, he felt needed in the purest way. But even in those warm moments, a quiet fear lived inside him. He worried about the future. He worried about whether he was enough. He worried about growing old without someone to share the weight. Most of all, he worried that his children might one day see his loneliness and feel responsible for it. So he kept going. Day after day, he showed up. He did the work. He smiled when he needed to. He carried love and fear together, believing this was just how life was now. He truly believed that no woman would ever want a man whose heart and time already belonged to his kids. What he didn't know, what he couldn't yet imagine, was that this belief, built from pain and experience, was about to be challenged. Not by force, not by drama, but by a simple truth he had never been allowed to believe before. And for now, he walked forward unaware, carrying his children, his doubts, and a heart that was tired, but still quietly hoping, even if he refused to admit it. Their meeting did not feel important at first. It was the kind of moment most people would forget by the end of the day. No dramatic timing, no special setting. Just two people crossing paths during an ordinary day. He almost didn't notice her at all because his mind was already full. Lists of things to do, worries waiting at home, and the quiet pressure of responsibility that never left him. They spoke casually at first. Simple words, safe topics. The weather, work, small complaints about how fast time seemed to move. He answered politely without giving too much of himself. That had become a habit. Over the years, he had learned how to speak without opening any doors. It was easier that way. She listened carefully, not just waiting for her turn to speak, but really listening. He noticed it without knowing why it mattered. When he paused, she didn't rush him. When he joked, she smiled naturally, not forced. There was an ease in the conversation that felt unfamiliar but not uncomfortable. They met again by chance days later, then again the week after. Each time the conversation lasted a little longer. He still kept things light. He talked about work struggles, everyday frustrations, things that didn't touch his heart. He avoided anything personal. He had learned that personal details often made people step back. She, on the other hand, shared small pieces of her life without turning them into stories meant to impress. She spoke honestly. Sometimes she laughed at herself. Sometimes she admitted she didn't have everything figured out. That honesty caught his attention. It felt real. One afternoon, the topic of family came up naturally, not forced, not dramatic. She mentioned her parents, a memory from childhood. Then she asked him simply and kindly about his own family. The question was gentle, but it made his chest tighten. This was always the moment. He hesitated. He considered changing the subject. He could have answered in a vague way, something safe, but something about her calm expression made him speak the truth. He told her he had children. He said it plainly, without explanation, without apology. He waited. Inside, he prepared himself for the familiar reaction. The pause, the polite smile, the slow emotional distance. He had seen it many times before. He had learned to recognize it instantly, but it didn't come. Instead, she nodded, not quickly, not awkwardly, just a normal response. She asked how old they were. She asked what they liked. Her voice didn't change. Her eyes didn't look away. There was no sign of discomfort. He felt confused. He answered her questions carefully, still expecting the shift to happen at any moment. He talked about school mornings, about their different personalities, about how loud the house could get. He didn't exaggerate or complain. He spoke with honesty and maybe a little pride. She smiled softly. She said it sounded like a full life. Those words stayed with him longer than he expected. As they continued talking, he noticed something else. She wasn't trying to fix him. She wasn't offering advice. She wasn't impressed or distant. She was simply present, and that presence felt rare. Later that evening, after they went their separate ways, he found himself thinking about the conversation. He replayed it in his mind while making dinner, while helping with homework, while washing dishes. He tried to understand why it felt different. He told himself not to overthink it. Still, a quiet curiosity had started to grow. Over the next few weeks, their meetings became less accidental. Conversations turned into shared coffee breaks, longer walks, small moments carved out of busy days. He remained cautious. He kept a careful distance. He did not talk about his fears, his loneliness, or the walls he had built around himself. She noticed his distance, even if she didn't say anything. Sometimes she asked thoughtful questions. Sometimes she let silence exist without filling it. She didn't push him to be more than he was ready to be. That patience unsettled him more than pressure ever could. One evening she asked him how he managed everything on his own. The question was simple, but it touched something deep inside him. For a moment he almost joked it away. That was his habit, but instead he paused. He told her the truth, not the full truth, but enough. He said some days were harder than others. He said he was tired more often than he liked to admit. He didn't complain. He didn't dramatize. He just spoke. She listened quietly. When he finished, she didn't rush to respond. She simply said that it sounded heavy and that he must be stronger than he realized. No one had said that to him in a long time. That night, after putting the kids to bed, he sat alone longer than usual. He thought about her words. He thought about how easily she accepted the parts of his life that others avoided. He reminded himself not to expect too much. He had been wrong before. He told himself this was just conversation, just comfort, nothing more. But comfort can be dangerous when someone has lived without it for too long. As time passed, he began to notice small changes in himself. He smiled more easily. He felt lighter during the day. He caught himself looking forward to their conversations. That realization scared him. He started pulling back without meaning to. He took longer to reply. He kept their meetings shorter. He convinced himself he was doing the right thing. He didn't want to risk disappointment. He didn't want to let hope grow where it could be crushed. She noticed the change. One afternoon, she gently asked if she had done something wrong. The question was calm, not accusing. He felt a sudden wave of guilt. He shook his head quickly and said no. He said he was just busy. Which was true, but not the whole truth. She accepted his answer, but something in her eyes told him she understood there was more. That night he couldn't sleep. His thoughts went in circles. He realized that his fear was not about her. It was about himself, about the belief he had carried for years that his life made him unlovable, that anyone who came close would eventually walk away. He wondered if pushing her away was just another way of proving that belief right. In the following days, he allowed himself to be a little more open. He shared a story about his children that wasn't easy. He talked about a mistake he made as a parent and how it still bothered him. His voice was quiet, careful. She didn't judge. She didn't offer solutions. She simply said that caring that deeply already made him a good father. That moment stayed with him. Slowly, without realizing it, he began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: safety. Not certainty, not promises, just safety in being seen without being pushed away. Still, fear remained. He worried about letting her into his children's lives. He worried about what would happen if things didn't work out. He worried about hope because hope had hurt him before, but something had already changed. For the first time in years, he could no longer fully believe the thought that no one would want a man with kids. The idea still lived in him, but it no longer felt solid. It had cracks now. And through those cracks, something quiet and unexpected was beginning to grow. As the days passed, the space between them became filled with thoughts he did not know how to handle. He found himself thinking about her during moments he once spent worrying. While driving to work, while standing in line at the store, even while folding clothes late at night, her calm voice and patient presence returned to his mind. This unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. He had trained himself not to want things. Wanting led to disappointment. Wanting led to pain. For years he had focused only on what was necessary: work, food on the table, bedtime routines, school forms, and quiet strength. Feelings beyond that felt dangerous. And now, without trying, something was pulling him toward emotions he had locked away. He noticed how careful he became around her. Every word felt important. Every pause felt loaded. He worried about saying too much, about revealing parts of himself that were not strong or stable. He worried that if she saw how tired he really was, how uncertain he felt inside, she would step back like others had. So he began to protect himself again. He kept conversations focused on safe topics. He talked about work more than feelings. He laughed things off when they came too close to deeper truths. When she asked how he was really doing, he answered with short sentences. "I'm fine. Just busy. Same as always." These words became shields. She noticed. She didn't accuse him or demand answers. Instead, she gave him space while staying present. That balance confused him. He was used to distance meaning loss. But she did not disappear. She stayed kind. She stayed consistent. That consistency made him uncomfortable because it felt unfamiliar. One evening, after a long day, he returned home exhausted. The kids were louder than usual. Homework took longer. Dinner burned slightly on the stove. He felt frustration rising, mixed with guilt for feeling it at all. By the time the house finally became quiet, his body felt heavy and his mind felt full. He sat alone in the living room and thought about her, about how she seemed to move through life without rushing, about how she listened without judgment, about how she accepted his life without hesitation. And then the fear came. What if this grows into something more? What if it ends? What if his children get attached? What if he gets attached? Those questions scared him more than loneliness ever had. He had seen how endings could hurt. He had lived through loss before, and he knew how deeply it could shape a person. He did not want his children to experience confusion or disappointment. He did not want to bring someone into their lives only to have them leave. Protecting them meant protecting himself too, or so he believed. The next time they met, he was quieter than usual. His smiles were smaller, his answers shorter. She noticed immediately. After a moment of silence, she gently asked if something was bothering him. He wanted to say everything. He wanted to tell her how afraid he was, how he didn't trust good moments anymore, how he believed deep down that his life was too complicated for anyone to stay. But instead he said he was tired, which was true but not complete. She nodded understanding and didn't push. But the space between them felt heavier now, filled with words he didn't say. That night he felt restless. He replayed the moment in his mind and wondered why honesty felt so hard. He realized something painful. He was not afraid of her reaction. He was afraid of hope. Hope had a way of making people believe in futures that did not always arrive. He had built his life around certainty. His children needed stability, not dreams that could disappear. In the days that followed, he began to pull away more clearly. He delayed meetings. He kept conversations brief. He told himself this was the responsible choice. He told himself distance was safer than connection. She felt it. One afternoon, she finally spoke about it. Not with anger, not with blame, just honesty. She told him she felt a change and wanted to understand it. She said she respected his space but didn't want to misunderstand silence as rejection. Her words caught him off guard. No one had spoken to him like that in a long time. Calm, direct, kind. He felt cornered by his own emotions. The walls he had built began to crack under the weight of truth. For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly he spoke. He told her he was afraid. He didn't go into every detail, but he shared enough. He said his life came with responsibilities that didn't leave much room for mistakes. He said he had learned not to expect too much from people. He said he worried that getting close would only lead to disappointment. He waited for her response with his chest tight. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she took a breath and said she understood fear. She said everyone carried something. She didn't promise anything. She didn't try to convince him of a future. She simply said she appreciated his honesty. That response stayed with him. He expected pressure. He expected disappointment. Instead, he received understanding. Over time, their conversations grew more thoughtful, slower, deeper. He shared small truths at first. Stories about mistakes he made as a parent, moments when he felt unsure, times when he questioned if he was doing enough. Each time he spoke, he braced himself for judgment. It never came. She didn't see his responsibilities as a burden. She didn't treat his fears as weaknesses. She acknowledged them as part of who he was. That acceptance began to soften something inside him. Still, the struggle continued. He found himself standing between two worlds. One was familiar and safe, loneliness, routine, emotional distance. The other was uncertain but warm, connection, trust, possibility. Stepping forward felt risky. Staying still felt painful. At night, after the kids were asleep, he sometimes imagined what life could look like if he allowed himself to believe again. Not a perfect future, just one where he wasn't carrying everything alone. Then fear would rush in, reminding him of how much there was to lose. He watched his children closely during this time. Their laughter, their trust, their dependence on him sharpened his protective instincts. He promised himself he would not make choices that could hurt them. But he also began to wonder if shutting himself off completely was truly protecting them or teaching them fear. That thought troubled him deeply. One quiet evening, while helping his child with a school project, he noticed how easily they asked for help, how naturally they trusted him to be there. It struck him that trust was not built by avoiding risk, but by showing up honestly. That realization did not erase his fear, but it gave him something new to think about. He began to understand that his distance was not strength. It was habit, a habit built from pain, reinforced by time. And habits, he realized, could be changed, slowly, carefully. So he made a small decision. He chose not to run. He did not promise anything to her. He did not rush forward. But he stopped pulling away. He allowed conversations to flow. He allowed moments to last. He allowed himself to feel without immediately shutting it down. It was uncomfortable. It was unfamiliar, but it was real. Fear still walked beside him, whispering warnings. But now there was something else walking there too, curiosity. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of trust. He did not yet know where this path would lead. He only knew that for the first time in a long while he was not turning away from it. The moment came quietly, the way important moments often do. There was no warning, no big event pushing it forward. Just a calm afternoon where the air felt still and his thoughts felt louder than usual. They were sitting together, not rushing anywhere, not distracted. The kind of moment that invites honesty without demanding it. He had been carrying words inside him for days, maybe weeks. They pressed against his chest every time he looked at her, every time she listened without judgment. He knew that if he didn't speak now, he might retreat again, and he was tired of retreating. He took a slow breath. For a few seconds he said nothing. She didn't interrupt. She had learned his silences, learned that sometimes he needed time to find the right words. That patience gave him courage. "I need to tell you something," he said finally, his voice low but steady. She turned toward him fully, her attention clear and calm. "Okay," she said simply. He looked down at his hands. They showed the signs of his life: work, effort, responsibility. He had always thought those signs made him less desirable. Now, he wondered if they were simply proof that he had lived honestly. "I don't usually let people get close," he began. "Not because I don't want to, but because I'm afraid." In fact, it was something he had avoided saying for years. "My life is already full," he continued. "I have kids. They come first, always. And because of that, I've told myself that no one would really want this life. No one would want me." She didn't rush to fix it or dismiss it. She let the words exist. He went on, feeling something loosen inside him. "I've seen how people pull back when they hear about my responsibilities. I understand why, but after a while you stop trying. You stop hoping. I thought it was safer to believe it wouldn't last." He frowned slightly, not in disagreement but confusion. Wrong. A man who puts others before himself. A man who knows responsibility, patience, and care. That's not something to avoid. That's something to respect. His chest felt tight, but not from fear, from relief. No one had ever said those things to him without hesitation. He looked away, blinking slowly. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said quietly. "Especially my kids. I've been so focused on protecting them that I forgot I'm allowed to want something too." But so does showing them what healthy connection looks like. That some days he might retreat out of habit, not intention. She told him she didn't need perfection. She needed honesty. That conversation didn't solve everything. It didn't erase his doubts overnight. But it did something more important. It gave those doubts less power. In the days that followed, he noticed changes in himself. Small ones, but meaningful. He didn't flinch when she asked about his children. He didn't apologize for his schedule. He stopped explaining his life as if it needed justification. He began to realize how much energy he had spent trying to make himself smaller. At home, his children noticed the difference too. He laughed more easily. He seemed lighter, not distracted, not absent, just more present. He listened more. He smiled without forcing it. One evening, as he tucked them into bed, one of them asked why he looked happy. He paused, surprised by the question. "I guess I am," he said softly. That moment stayed with him long after the lights were turned off. With her, things remained steady. They didn't rush into big steps. They respected the pace his life required. She never tried to compete with his children for his time. Instead, she respected the place they held in his world. That respect deepened his trust more than any grand gesture could have. There were still moments when fear crept back in. Moments when old thoughts whispered that this wouldn't last. But now, when those thoughts came, he remembered her words. "You're wrong about that." One evening, sitting alone after the house had gone quiet, he thought about how far he had come, not in accomplishments but in courage. He had faced his fear instead of hiding behind it. He had spoken the truth instead of letting silence decide for him. For the first time in years, the idea of sharing his life didn't feel impossible. He didn't know what the future would bring. He didn't need to. For now, it was enough to know that the belief he once held so tightly no longer controlled him. He was not unwanted. He was not too much. He was a man with a full life, and someone had seen that and said yes, without hesitation. And that simple truth changed everything. Life did not suddenly become perfect after that conversation. There were no dramatic changes, no instant answers to every fear he had carried for years, but something important had shifted inside him. The heavy belief that once ruled his thoughts no longer felt solid. It was still there, sometimes quiet, sometimes loud, but it no longer controlled his choices. Days continued as they always had. Mornings were still busy. Lunches were still packed in a rush. Homework still took patience, and bedtime still arrived later than planned. His life remained full, demanding, and sometimes exhausting. But now it felt different. It felt shared, even if only in small ways. He began to let her see more of his real life. Not just the calm moments, but the messy ones too. He told her when days were hard. He admitted when he felt tired or unsure. Instead of hiding those parts, he spoke about them openly. And each time he did, he felt lighter. She never tried to take over his role or step into spaces that weren't hers. She respected his rhythm, his priorities, his responsibilities. That respect mattered more to him than words ever could. It showed him that care didn't need to be loud to be real. Slowly, carefully, the idea of blending worlds began to feel possible. The first time she met his children, it was simple and brief. No expectations, no pressure, just a calm introduction, a shared moment, and gentle kindness. He watched closely, his protective instincts alert. He noticed how she spoke to them with respect, how she listened, how she didn't force connection. His children responded naturally. They didn't question her presence. They accepted it as children often do, without fear, without judgment. Seeing that eased something deep inside him. As time passed, moments began to stack gently on top of one another. Shared meals, quiet conversations after the kids went to bed, laughter over small things, support during stressful days, nothing rushed. Nothing forced. He learned that love didn't arrive all at once. It grew slowly, built from trust, patience, and understanding. There were still days when doubt returned. Days when old fears whispered that things would fall apart. On those days, he talked instead of withdrawing. He spoke instead of shutting down. That choice was new, and it took effort, but it changed everything. She listened, not as someone trying to fix him, but as someone willing to walk beside him. One evening, after a long week, he sat alone and thought about how far he had come. He remembered the man he once was, closed off, convinced he had nothing left to offer anyone beyond responsibility. That man had survived, but he hadn't lived fully. Now he was learning how to live again, not recklessly. Not blindly, but honestly. He realized that love was not about having an empty life ready to be filled. It was about inviting someone into a life that already mattered. His children, his experiences, his past, they were not obstacles. They were part of his story. And someone had chosen that story. That realization changed how he saw himself. He stood a little taller. He spoke with more confidence. He stopped apologizing for the life he had built with effort and care. His children noticed the change too. They felt the warmth in the home, the steadiness in his presence. They saw him smile more, laugh more, and rest more easily. Without knowing it, they were learning that love could grow without taking anything away. Over time, the fear of being alone faded into the background. It didn't disappear completely, but it no longer ruled his decisions. He understood that even if things didn't last forever, the connection was real and that mattered. He had spent years believing love required perfection, freedom, and simplicity. Now he understood something deeper. Love required truth, and truth had finally set him free. He didn't know what the future would look like. There would be challenges. There would be hard days. Life would continue to test him, but now he knew he didn't have to face everything alone unless he chose to. He had learned that being a man with kids did not make him less worthy of love. It made him real, and sometimes real is exactly what someone has been waiting for all along.